Hi, my name is Jen Graflander, and I'm going to be discussing technology acquisition in the academic library. This is sort of my area that I know well, and so that's why I chose to focus specifically on this topic. So, starting out by just looking at the history of the academic library, historically, this was not a place where teaching took place. Um, Academic libraries had little need to branch outside a set curriculum. Since the traditional classical curriculum was already set in stone, students were not doing a lot of research. They certainly didn't need help researching or using library tools. But by the late 1900s, there was a change in the idea of scholarship and what scholarship meant. And so also the role of the university began to change, and they took libraries with them. Now, students might be researching a wide variety of topics and need assistance doing so. Additionally, in contrast to the original library organizations, libraries began to standardize, which made it easier for them to share tools across, across campuses and across institutions that might be of use to their students that are starting to research. Um, we've still seen that libraries have been expanding the scope of their service. Um, Historically, universities have only served on-campus students. You've been physically required to be in class in order to get the education. But of course, as we well know, being in an online class, that's no longer the case. That's no longer necessary because we have so many amazing tools for distance learning. Students don't need to be in the same city, state, or even country in order to get the same education through the same program and interact with their peers. With online course management tools like D2L and Coursera, as well as recording software to capture lectures, your physical location is becoming increasingly irrelevant. Golda Meir Library serves hundreds or even thousands of students that are taking advantage of these educational opportunities via distance. So it's important that when we look at acquisition that we're looking at tools that are going to help our students as well that are learning from a distance. I came up with just a few acquisition criteria just to save on length, but the first one I'm looking at is benefit versus risk. And when I say risk, I don't mean detriment or harm necessarily to the student, but I mean risk more like time cost. Can my students use it effectively? It's a really important thing, especially if I'm going to be using it in a session or in an in-class session. Overall cost, how much are we going to have to pay? Is it worth it? Distance and physical student benefit. Are my distance students going to benefit as much as my physical students? And then, of course, accessibility. I considered looking at student input and whether or not other institutions are using it, but I think that those criteria only speak to either a small population or a student body that has very specific needs, and looking at other institutions isn't really going to help us because they're not serving our same population. So I'm going to look at LibGuides as a tool that really goes through some of this criteria that really, I believe, fulfills this criteria. I really love LibGuides. That's a great way to organize information and create web pages for instruction. We use them for a couple different things. So I'm going to look at my first criteria, which is benefit versus risk. I've noticed that students latch on to LibGuides fairly quickly. They're pretty intuitive, especially when the guides themselves are as well designed as our instructional librarians at UWM have made them. Students can follow along with these LibGuides in class pretty easily without me having to do a lot of instructional troubleshooting or teaching the technology. And they can also access them from home to get a refresher on what's happened during the lesson. So, of course, LibGuides is not a free software, but for the second criteria, cost, I've noticed that in a lot of blogs and things like that, librarians have really been raving about the cost effectiveness and the sort of cost being appropriate for what's offered with LibGuides. So, although there are sort of open source options for LibGuides, they don't have some of the same benefits. One of those benefits, of course, is that the LibGuide software company SpringShare has excellent customer service, very responsive. But the other thing is that because so many libraries use LibGuides, so many librarians are creating content for this software. And so we can share it among each other with Creative Commons licenses. And we've been doing that, and it's been really cool to be able to use other things that might benefit our students, even if we weren't necessarily who created them. So with on-campus students, we kind of use LibGuides as virtual handouts. This is an example of one of those virtual handouts. It has links and activities that they needed to follow during this class, which is EdPsych 100. And it also has like a refresher that they can go back and look at and see what we've done in our class that day, so they can work on some of this stuff on their own at home. And then for our distance students who aren't necessarily we're in an interactive workshop, we do also use LibGuides to create standalone guides. So this is a particular one that we made to show students how they might use the library. It's designed for them to access this information on their own when they need that information, rather than necessarily having to attend a formal presentation like they might if they were an on-campus student. This is something they can click on the website and just bring it right up. Of course, my last criteria, accessibility, is absolutely crucial. We serve so many students with so many needs. And LibGuides has created really screen reader friendly software. They have a wide variety of templates that are really compatible with the vast majority of e-readers and e-reading software. And they've also made sure that the basic code for LibGuides works well with screen readers and their adaptability software. But of course, with LibGuides and with anything that you're adding content to, it's only as accessible as you allow it to be. So if the librarian isn't going to add that information or make it accessible, then it's not going to be accessible. So librarians also need to have that in mind when they're using LibGuides. Finally, I wanted to just talk a little bit about failure. I have a story from my undergrad library when we tried to implement treadmill terminals. It was a technology we were really excited about. We had read a lot of studies about motion and learning. We knew we had kinesthetic learners and things like that. And we also got really excited, and we kind of wanted to be like, show off how innovative we were, and this institution has this, well, me too, I have something really cool. Instead of being the sort of amazing thing that we thought students would flock to, they ended up being really expensive to maintain. People kept falling off and getting hurt, which of course is a liability, and also just not good. And people tried to come and work out when the other treadmills at the actual gym were full. And of course, we're not a gym. So we ended up scrapping them. And luckily, we were able to return them to the vendor because they were on loan. But I learned two things about technology acquisition. One is that you should always try before you buy, because there's always unforeseen issues that you may not realize. They may be things that you can tolerate or fix, but in this case, they were not, and we had to get rid of them. Also, just don't be afraid to innovate again, because even though you may have picked a dud once, that doesn't mean that you're not necessarily going to pick something really cool next time. So don't be afraid to sort of leap back into the innovation pool, even if you fell off of a treadmill terminal. Finally, I'm going to close by speaking a little bit to the future. I think that what's going to happen is that the physical infrastructure of the library will become less and less crucial to the library experience. Certainly the space will be present, but I think that students will move to online courses and get used to accessing things remotely. So we'll have to update our remote resources, expand and integrate our ebooks collections into our catalog. We're also going to have to come up with more reference solutions for distance students. We currently at Golda Meir don't have Skype or FaceTime a librarian, and I think that's something that students are really going to want to use in the future. And then finally, I think we're going to see more libraries hosting their own content for quicker and easier document retrieval, and also just having a space where they can store content rather than just simply indexing the metadata. So these are my references quickly, but other than that, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.